Well, good morning, everybody. Extremely good to be here at the Dialogue. Ambassador, colleagues, thank you very much indeed. I have to say, listening to the speakers so far on the panel, I conclude that it's quite a good time to be a diplomat. I might not lose my job, I may lose my job for incompetence. I'm not going to lose my job for lack of work. We've certainly built ourselves up a pretty big picture of the challenges that we face, and I think that's right, actually. Certainly in my 25 years in government, it's hard to remember a time where we have so many trends in flux, and I particularly was struck by Ambassador Munter's comments on those big four trends. I'm also a fan, I think, if I don't misquote him, it was President Eisenhower, a fan of his saying that if you can't solve a problem, make it bigger. And on a lot of the issues we're facing at the minute, I think making it bigger is often what we're talking about. So the panel were given a couple of quite major topics to chew on, and I would endorse many of the comments we've just heard, including refreshing candor from Ambassador Ganich on some of what we're looking at. I won't repeat all of those. We've talked about the tilts to the Indo-Pacific, I think many of the speakers yesterday talked about fifth dimension and hybrid conflict and the certainly technological acceleration that is affecting all of our societies. But if you will allow me, I want to make three particular emphases on trends that I think matter as we think about Pakistan, and then I have three propositions for you, Ambassador. So the three emphases on the trends are demography, environmental pressures, and COVID. On demography, it's an issue I don't think we talk about enough, actually, and I'll come on to this in relation to Pakistan, but the global population will increase by about 2 billion people by 2050, mainly in this part of the world, in South Asia and in Africa. 1 in 4 of the world's population will be African by 2050. 41% of the world are under the age of 24. 41% under the age of 24. I don't think anyone in this room is under the age of 24. People often accuse me of being too young to be a High Commissioner. I'm not quite as young as I look, but it's a real reminder of the power of that demography. Pakistan, 380 million people by 2050. That might make it the third or fourth largest country in the world by population. But set against that, of course, an aging population in the West with a pension load, a debt to GDP ratio that will make real structural inequalities in the global economy. So I think as we talk about trends, much more attention to demographics. Secondly is, several speakers have mentioned it, environmental stresses and resource limits. You know, the UK has championed climate change this year, hosting with Italy the COP26 climate change talks that the Foreign Minister referred to in his remarks. And that blend of climate, food and water stresses, I think, are particularly serious here in Pakistan. The Indus Basin irrigation system is predicted to have about a quarter to a third of the country's needs lost in the next 10 years. That's in a country that is 70% reliant on agriculture. So all of those pressures, I could talk a lot more about it, are going to lead, I think, to a global race for resources and tension. Third is COVID. Several have referred to it. Respectfully, Ambassador Danila, I don't agree. I think COVID is still with us and very serious. I think the evidence of Omicron's spread, I think, means that we should all brace ourselves for a difficult new year. And even if we put that aside, I think it's a huge crisis of long-running proportions. The health implications we're probably only in the second year of. The economic implications of COVID, I think, will be with us for at least 5 years. The UK, for example, is facing its basically biggest recession in modern history. 300 years, we lost up to 20% of our GDP by some calculations last year. This is an enormous impact economically, and as we know, the implications of these events, actually the geopolitical implications, I think could take 20 years to play out. It's been a reminder not only of our shared humanity, but the interconnectedness of the world. I think it will lead to a demand for more resilient and responsive states with a greater focus on national self-reliance. So all of the issues we're talking about will be put through that lens where globalization is questioned, international institutions will be under greater pressure, and countries will have to rely on the power of the state, arguably more than any time since the Second World War. So those were the three I would pick in terms of the trends, and that many, I think, of our leaders are thinking about, and I certainly think we as diplomats need to be focusing on. Put that together, I think it means greater uncertainty and greater systemic risk than we have faced for many a year. I think it means probably worsening inequality, worsening social cohesion, and more competition as national interests take priority over shared interests. For all of that, I strongly agree, Ambassador Munter, with you that all countries need to look beyond traditional categories. Often when I talk to people here in Pakistan, it sometimes seems as though they assume we're in some sort of great game where dastardly British diplomats are still charging around the country full of nefarious conspiracies. Those days are over, and our job as diplomats is to find cooperation and collaboration and to build linkages where there are divides. So from that brief picture, in addition to many of the challenges we've heard this morning so far, three propositions for you on the specific questions we were given. The first is it is absolutely right to focus on economic growth. Traditionally, British High Commissioners like myself, many of my predecessors well known to you in this room, would have come to Islamabad and focused on security. My background is in national security. It's formed much of my career. But actually, I think I should be talking about inclusive economic growth, about jobs, and about human capital. The UK is repositioning itself in terms of its foreign policy at the heart of a global network of economic, diplomatic and security partnerships. A speech which my foreign minister gave at Chatham House last week is worth reading on this if people haven't seen it, with an emphasis on democracy and free markets. And in that, the tilt to the Pacific, of which Pakistan, I think, should consider itself a part, is economically driven. By 2050, Deputy Ambassador, China will be 20% of the world's economy. India will be 15%, the US will be 12%. These are big shifts in global geoeconomics, and hard power tends to follow that economic power and indeed soft power. So I have absolutely no problem with Shah Mahmood's assertion at the outset and the policy set out by Imran Khan's government that geoeconomics should be a central part of the security conversations we have. What does that mean for Pakistan? Well, as I've already said, I think demographics are the key driver. The country is growing at about 2.4%. That's high. As I mentioned, 380 million odd people by the middle of the century, and just to keep pace with that population growth, the country needs to create about 1.5 million jobs a year. 1.5 million jobs a year just to stand still if those young people coming of age are to have a livelihood, to have security, be able to provide for their families. So it's no surprise, I think, in this town that the economy is the number one issue. And if you will allow me, an important part of that is gender equality. No country can achieve its potential without unleashing half of its population. I'm delighted to see many female members on the panel today. Too often, and in the room, too often I speak at events where it's a line of men in suits. So thank you to the organisers for bringing that voice to the stage and the conversation. I'd also commend the leadership of President Alvi, who has been a very powerful voice on family planning and the importance of having an honest and open conversation about family planning and population control given these masses. So in sum, I agree with many. I think it was discussed yesterday that Pakistan's population is an asset, but we have to work quite hard to make sure that that is not a demographic burden and becomes a demographic dividend. So proposition one, the economy, inclusive economic growth, driven by the demographic need, is absolutely rightly our focus. Proposition two is specifically related to Afghanistan, and that is that actually our collective interests on Afghanistan are aligned, and to that end all partners have no alternative but to work with Pakistan. Our interests are aligned, and we have to work with Pakistan. I don't think the macro picture that you're hearing from this panel is particularly changed by the withdrawal from Kabul in August. Certainly it's given us many, many deep challenges on which we have to work together, but I don't think the fundamentals actually strategically change. When I hear countries speak, if you look at, say, the Troika Plus statement, that many of the governments represented here were involved in last month, we were all saying the same thing in Afghanistan. We want a safe passage for people, we want to avoid a humanitarian crisis, we want to counter terrorism and not allow Afghanistan to become again a geography where threat can be projected to Pakistan or anywhere else. We want the rights of minorities to be protected, yes, and yes, we think that teenage girls should be able to go to school. On all of these issues, a stable, inclusive Afghanistan is our shared goal. I want to emphasize the UK is taking a pragmatic approach. We are talking to the Taliban. The Prime Minister's envoy, Sir Simon Gass, an old colleague and friend of mine, was one of the first Western envoys to visit Kabul in that guise. And as well as engaging, we are very focused on the humanitarian crisis. I think it is a crisis. Total UK aid to Afghanistan this year is nearly £250 million, with £50 million for life-saving humanitarian support to over 2.5 million vulnerable Afghans. And a lot of our focus, including at the OIC conference, which I commend Pakistan for hosting this coming weekend, is on discussing the fix, the very complex fix, for the liquidity problem that Afghanistan faces. How do we get cash back into that system? I hope people have noticed the US Treasury has taken a decision to allow personal and non-personal remittances to be made, and the World Bank has just announced the release of nearly $300 million of assets from the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund. So these are very important issues we're working on. Pakistan as a key partner and a player, and itself, as Shah Mahmood Qureshi says, has the most to lose if we cannot find a way through these issues. So my second proposition is really collaboration on Afghanistan. Third and finally is about regional connectivity. And I do agree that in line with these comments on geoeconomics, we must do more to build regional connectivity in South Asia. As a statistic I'm very fond of, that ASEAN as a formal trading bloc in Southeast Asia, its collective GDP it comes from about 20% of intra-regional trade. Here in South Asia, obviously not a formal bloc, it's about 2%. Bluntly, those jobs will not be created for those kids if we don't redress that and boost more trade in this region. Therefore, I think flowing from that is that some way to de-escalation with India, between India and Pakistan, is absolutely essential. Confrontation is in neither side's interest. You all know well the long-standing position of the UK that it's for both countries to find a lasting resolution to the situation in Kashmir, taking into account the wishes of the Kashmiri people, and it's not for the UK to prescribe a solution or to act as a mediator. And I do think, if I can emphasize Ambassador Ganesh's comments, the risk of an unwanted escalation is the thing that we should guard against, whilst encouraging dialogue and trying to find lasting diplomatic solutions. On my economic theme, the World Bank estimates that if the border between India and Pakistan was opened, it would lead to a 30% rise over some years in Pakistan's GDP, a 30% rise. I also think for regional connectivity, it means that there is not a sort of zero-sum choice with China, and I think Foreign Minister Qureshi has set this out very well. If you like, the shorthand for the message is avoid campism. The CPEC infrastructure and the investment of CPEC, I think, is good for Pakistan if it is done in the right way, if those initiatives increase regional connectivity, if it's transparent, doesn't have a large debt burden, transfers skills and meet international standards on debt sustainability, environmental impacts, climate change, social impact, and as I say, transparency. So I don't think that needs to be a threat to UK interests and allows us to partner and build growth. So in conclusion, Ambassador, I think these are very serious challenges. And I should say for the UK, most of you see me say publicly, and on my digital diplomacy, which I'm trying to champion on behalf of Shah Mahmood, the UK relationship with Pakistan is non-discretionary. It's built on our deep diaspora links, our very close population ties, 1.6 million British Pakistanis, 400,000 visitors a day. We've seen the return of airlines. We've seen the talk of that huge economic potential, which I'd like to build on, and a development relationship that invests heavily in education, in health, in human capital, as I mentioned. And I've got this far, I haven't even talked about cricket, so I'm very pleased to avoid that. My final two comments with that is to say that I do think, as several speakers have referred to, that Pakistan has a challenge with its perceptions. And I like the quip that we shouldn't leave diplomacy to the diplomats, but there is a collective job to ensure that modern-day perceptions of Pakistan that I see and understand from living and working in this wonderful country are matched by what people outside see. I think, therefore, conferences like this should be absolutely commended. It's not my job as an ambassador to be a cheerleader for Pakistan. It's my job to advance British interests. But where we do see those perceptions as out of place, I think we should call them out. And if anyone has been to the Pakistan Expo pavilion in Dubai and wonders how to do a fantastic job of promoting Pakistan, go and see it. The most extraordinary pavilion, absolutely brilliantly done. And finally, and I think this echoes what Ambassador Munter was saying, in all of these conversations, this goes back, I think, to my comment on looking beyond traditional categories as we face these trends. I am very convinced in everything I have said in the last 10 minutes and everything we are discussing as a panel, the solutions will be found within Pakistan. And I think it is quite easy for us in a traditional diplomat's paradigm to really focus about the Pakistan relationship with the US, what's happening in the Beltway, what's happening with the Biden administration, what's happening in London, what does this mean for Pakistan's relationship with Europe, the tilts to China and the Indo-Pacific. Actually, the solutions will be Pakistani solutions, and they will be found within Pakistan. Thank you very much. Bahut shukriya.